So, when did counseling stop being about problem solving? Well, not anymore. Introducing solution-focused counseling with the unlicensed counselor. And now, here's your host, Steve Moak.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of The Unlicensed Counselor. My name is Steve Moak. I am the Unlicensed Counselor on a very special episode we're bringing to you today. Or I don't know, maybe it's just special to me. But kind of breaking up the format a little bit. Had some thoughts over the last week. I was coming up on a milestone in my own personal life. And that is September 11th is obviously a very important day in time in history. But for me, September 11th was the last day that I had a drink or a drug. So I actually just celebrated 10 years in recovery in my own personal life. And as I was kind of going through the show this week, I was like, what do I want to talk about? What do I want to talk about? And I was like, let's just kind of reflect. Let's kind of look back at 10 years. And I actually just made some notes. Usually I kind of have notes on the topics and some key points that I want to hit. Today I really have more notes on just prompts for myself to kind of reflect over what it's been like. I get asked often, why'd you stop drinking? What's it like? How do you stay sober? Different things like that. It's not necessarily normal that everybody, doesn't drink. And so I get a lot of questions. And honestly, life has been weird, interesting, good, different, not what I thought it was going to be in the 10 years since I last picked up a drink or a drug. So I said, let's just kind of see where this goes today. Let's just kind of take it question by question, and I'll just kind of spend a little bit of time kind of reflecting on what that journey is. I mean, 10 years it's no joke. I mean, look, every day's a gift when you're sober and you kind of have that thing inside you that oftentimes tells you to want to pick up a drink or a drug. And so to put it together 365 times 10 is not easy to do. So not looking for any congratulations or anything, but let's just share. Let's just think on it. We'll do this kind of together and think about it out loud. But before we do that little interesting journey, let's go ahead and start by thanking our newest sponsor, Buzzbin Media. Again, this is trash can advertising. This is a fun little business that I'm involved with, actually. This is where we pay you $5 a bin, so $10 a month, to put decals, little ads on the side of your trash can that you roll out to the side of the street. So it's a little advertising program. But think of it as we pay you $5 a month, we pay for your Netflix. It's a cool, simple little thing. Go to the new resident form at Buzzbin Media, BUZ1ZBIN media.com. Just a fun little service we're going to be rolling out in your neck of the woods. There's a lot of advertising. Give us a follow on Instagram, all that kind of stuff to stay up to date. But want a couple extra bucks sent to your Venmo account, go to buzzbinmedia.com. And again, thanks for being a part of the show. And then as always, I like to talk about the StopStartsHere.org. This is the nonprofit work that we do. This is youth drug abuse prevention. And this is kind of a cool little nugget. I just got word today from our partner who does the creative and the videos and the production side of things that we were nominated for an Emmy. So, yeah, I know. That's pretty cool. I didn't know they nominated kind of short videos like what we did for this Sherry's story, who kind of spoke about her son's overdose from fentanyl, and we did a little piece on it, and it's really interesting and engaging. Go to the StopStartsHere.org. You can find that video and a bunch of other content that we produced as well, too. So, Emmy-nominated nonprofit work that we're doing now as well, too. So that's just kind of neat. So give us a follow on all the usual channels there. And last but not least, give the Unlicensed Counselor a follow on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all the places that you look for me and find me on social media. It's where we just clip up the show, right? I put out full episodes on YouTube. I put them on all the normal podcast episodes at places where you find them. But you can find little clips on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all that good stuff. Look and share our podcast anywhere you find finer podcasts as well, too, because I certainly think we qualify for that. So as we dig into today's topic, it's 10 years sober. It's like, wow, what in the world happened? How did I do this? How did I stop? What have I learned over this last course of the last 10 years? I'm just like, okay, let's break it down a little bit and let's talk about kind of my personal growth. I'd like to think I'm a better version of myself now. When you use drugs and alcohol on a daily basis, and again, I'm not talking about, my drug or alcohol use wasn't a glass of wine like normal people can do. it wasn't just having an edible or smoking a joint or something like that. I mean, this was daily drug use. This was daily excess drinking, oftentimes to the point of blacking out and things like that. So when you remove all of that, the first thing that you're going to notice is that I got a lot of time in my schedule, right? All the time that I was doing those other things, I now have back in my day. So I really had to find some time to kind of fill this. But early on, I used Alcoholics Anonymous as a support group. I'm a big advocate for that. I am for whatever group or support that you find beneficial to you. I found that works for me. I still go to that. I don't go to it as often as I used to, but I will go pick up my 10-year chip. And one of the reasons it's important to me is, it's kind of that marker every year that I do this and get to see the people that are in the rooms that we're still doing the deal. And I see a lot of the same faces, and then I see a lot of the same faces who have gone out and come back, and then I see faces who aren't there anymore and come to find out that they're no longer with us. So it's just a good reminder to me of kind of what this thing can do. A lot of people call it, alcoholism and drug addiction disease. I don't get caught up into that. I just know what it can do to me when I start down that path. The other thing that I think is really important and why I continue to go even, 10 years out is that I think it's a good example for other people to show that it can work too, right? Because when you're a couple days, a couple hours off of your last drink or your last drug, and you walk into an AA room, you're like, you don't really believe any of this. You're just kind of like, these people are phonies. I don't buy into any of this stuff. And then somebody stands up and picks up a 10-year chip or 15-year or 1 year or whatever it is. I just think it kind of helps, show the new people that there is hope. There is some light at the end of this thing as well too. But, my first couple years when I was first getting sober, it was not easy. All right. So don't let me tell you that it's like, okay, I'm 10 years out and it's like, oh, I've got this all figured out. I went to an AA meeting every single day for the first year. Right. I went from a treatment center. I went from a detox where I spent 5 days into a treatment center that I spent 45 days in, to then into a sober living home, which is a structured environment where you have a curfew, you get drug and alcohol tested. It's a home where just guys were allowed. You had to report where you were going. You had to go to a certain number of meetings. You had to do chores around the house. Like, it was very structured and regulated. So I then did that for another 90 days. So I spent, close to almost 6 months in kind of transitional care from the day that I stopped drinking and using to the time I kind of re-entered into the world. And I needed every single bit of that in order to kind of help reset my foundation. Because when you spent, the last decade kind of partying, drinking, doing whatever, it takes more than just that 30 days that you often hear about in a treatment center environment to kind of reset the brain, to break some of those patterns, to really try and start to move away from those things. And it physically hurts just from withdrawals, the sleep, the appetite, the mood. All of these things are now getting reset. And so I spent that first period in time, for the first 6 months, kind of under some type of care. And then as I transitioned out in the world, I started dating, and I started dating a girl that I actually met in treatment, which, looking back on it, they call it 13th step a lot of time when you meet someone early on in recovery and things like that. I understand the logic behind it. It's very easy when two people get together to kind of, if one goes sideways and starts drinking or using again, to kind of pull the other person down along with you. Fortunately, that didn't happen in our instances. We both had sponsors. We were kind of doing the responsible thing. We thought we were, and we were for the most part. But, one of the things that I did find that it did detract a little bit from that emphasis on focusing on yourself in early recovery, which I think is really important. When you kind of look to someone else for that support, you're kind of getting some of that affection and things like that. You're kind of filling that gap that you had with drugs and alcohol before, kind of with love or sex or whatever it is too. And so there is merit to that. Fortunately, I will say we were a little bit of the exception to that. Well, Steve, didn't you end up getting divorced? Yeah, 8 years later, but that happens to people who just meet and get married. I don't think that was really a condition or a part of why we got divorced. But it's something I would be very careful of. I'm not going to say not to do it and be a hypocrite here, but it's something I'd be very careful. But it's it's a delicate situation early on. So, oftentimes people say kind of wait for a year out to start dating. It's not bad advice. It's not bad advice. And honestly, when I got divorced now, and again, this was 2 years ago, I actually took that advice, even though I'm not drinking or anything like that, just to give myself that time, because I had a very clear mind now and saw that, hey, I can see how easily I can fill feelings and things with, another person. Let's make sure that I get myself right so that, again, I come out of this a much better version of myself. Same thing in kind of early recovery as well, too. But the journey from, going into treatment, the transition out of this, it was challenging. I mean, you've been in a career, you've been in making money, and now all those things are ripped out from underneath you. You had the fancy condo and all the nice trips and things that you used to do, and now you're kind of back to square one. You're 35 years old and kind of hitting the reset button. So it was challenging. It was really challenging, I should say. And there were many different obstacles along the way that I kind of had to face, with kind of rebuilding trust with the family, kind of learning how to love and be loved within a relationship as well, too. I was now a stepdad. We weren't married yet, but I was now responsible for these other kids as well, too. And then on my mind, it's like, well, you're getting a little bit older. You're going to have kids. There's just this flood of things all while you're trying to navigate, not trying to pick up a drink or a drug. And it's really challenging. And that's why I think the benefits of AA and the sponsor and what other type of support program are key, so that you're not trying to do this alone. I basically, had to reinvent myself and kind of find a new clarity in my own life. And that took time. And I don't mean like the 6 months. I think this took the first 1 to 2 and maybe even to 3 years. I enrolled in graduate school. And I went to work at the treatment center that I was a client at. So I was what's called a behavioral health technician. So I was just not paid very much, an hourly employee. But for me, it was a really safe environment to kind of, again, help transition my life back into stable grounds, find my footing, be in a secure environment, help others and things like that. And it inspired me to then go on to graduate school. So I enrolled in graduate school and completed all the coursework to become a licensed counselor. Now, well, Steve, isn't this show called The Unlicensed Counselor? You kind of missed the mark there a little bit, didn't you? Yes, when we got to the practicum portion of this, I then embarked on another chapter, which was the startup chapter of my life, and had family then, was getting married, had a baby on the way, and just didn't have the time and the hours commitment that I thought I was going to when I started the master's program 3 years earlier, to do all that. And now it wasn't going to work. So I had to put that on the shelf as I embarked on this kind of startup journey, which, really transformed another chapter of my life. But I've talked about that, and I don't want to get down into the weeds on that one. But, really, there was a lot of emotional challenges that I was going through during all these different phases. And it took a long time for me, and I'm not saying I've nailed it now, to really kind of understand what the emotions feel like, how I used to respond to them, how I'd like to now respond to them. But I really needed to practice that over time, because just because you took the drinking and the drugs away from me doesn't mean that I couldn't still get angry. It doesn't mean that I still couldn't say mean things or not. It takes practice. I mean, people think that you take the drugs and alcohol away, you're just instantly going to be a better person. No, you're still the same person. You just don't have that little coping thing that you've always had and you've been able to. So, understanding the emotional challenges that I was going through and having to kind of face those head on now, it was hard. And, fortunately, I had family that was supporting me. I had my significant other who was supporting me. I had, hobbies and interests and, good things going in my life, so I could talk to friends and family about the stuff that was going on. But it was a real process to really try and understand how to deal with these emotions. And by the way, I did it wrong. And I did it wrong years into being sober as well, too. And it continued to take practice. It took a lot of hard lessons from, the relationship and ultimately getting divorced, and then having to refine myself again and what that looks like. What did I do wrong? You thought things were just going to be easier because you got sober, and it's just not the case. Just because you stop drinking and using drugs doesn't mean that life is like, this smooth little ride now. In fact, it gets pretty bumpy, and you don't have the little thing that you're used to turning to that kind of makes you feel a little bit better, that takes that edge off, that reduces that anxiety a little bit. So you've really got to kind of do it a little bit differently. Now, what are some things that maybe I didn't expect as I was going through this? You know, there are times where you can feel pretty lonely in early recovery, right? You know, I was a very social guy. I went out all the time. You know, I would go to networking events, I go to bars, I go to parties, I go to events, I go to get-togethers. You get invited to a lot of stuff. Like, I didn't miss anything. I was a social butterfly. I loved it. And again, I'm still a social person, but now, you know, early on, there's just this little fear of it. And so I would just, not fear, but it's like I just didn't want to put myself in those positions where everybody be getting hammered or wasted or potentially doing drugs or something. I was like, I just bow out. But when you bow out and don't go and do some of these things, you get a little bit of the, am I missing out? You know, you kind of beat yourself up a little bit. You're like, and maybe there's some loneliness in there. Again, I've said before, I'm not really a depressive kind of guy, so I never got that. But you do feel that little fear of missing out from time to time. And again, I could go do these things, but it's like I valued my sobriety much more because it's what I needed to do. I know what the alternative looks like. I've proven that out many times, and I just didn't want to do that anymore. So there are certainly times in that journey that even though I had a significant other and family and friends and all that kind of stuff, that you do feel some loneliness, you know, when you see posts and other people are going out and doing things and maybe you didn't get invited to it when you used to always get invited to it and things like that. It kind of hurts a little bit, and you've got to figure out a way to kind of adjust that and reconcile it. The other thing is you are going to lose some friends along the way, and you know, maybe they weren't as close of friends as you thought. Maybe they were more using buddies and things like that, and hangers on when, you know, bar tabs were getting picked up and different things like that. But it still hurts. It still feels like a loss as you're going through these things, and that's stuff that inherently you know when you're getting sober and going through treatment and all these things. You know you're going to lose some of that. But then when it kind of hits you and you're at home on a Friday night and, you know, they're out doing whatever it is, like it kind of hits you sometimes. You're just like, oh, man. You know, so that's something that, you know, maybe I didn't expect or just felt a little bit differently when the reality actually hits you in. Now, on the positive side of things, that maybe what I didn't expect is kind of all the new opportunities that I've been introduced to and had the opportunity to be present for, from podcasting to hot yoga to weightlifting to, you know, online dating to, I mean, you name it. There's a lot of stuff that has been neat and fun and interesting that I've now got to participate in that I didn't expect, you know, all these different types of things. The road that my life is kind of taking me, I would have never expected. But when you get introduced to different people and you're open to new things and you're coherent and present and not blacked out and stuff, like neat things can kind of happen. And I think one of the biggest things that you don't really realize early on that I've kind of reflected on is the impact of being sober and how that can help others, right? And again, that's not trying to be self-serving or anything like that, but when people are now looking, especially if you put together a little bit of time, right, and you're a good example of what it can be, hopefully, you know, you're doing the right things, being kind, all those types of things, you know, you get a lot of calls from friends and family members, concerned ones, loved ones of like, hey, my son or daughter, my husband or wife, you know, are doing this. Can you talk to them? Can you meet with them? Do you have any feedback? Is there anything that you can do to kind of help? And so it's nice to be, you know, valued, and that your experience is valued in a way that it can be beneficial to others. So, you know, that's something that you don't really experience, you don't think about early on, but being able to kind of give back a little bit after you've been through something like this is pretty neat. And people often compliment me, like, that's great, you're one of the strongest people. And it's like, I don't take compliments well to begin with, and let alone this type of thing, because it's like, I brought it all on myself, you know, and I don't pass the blame on anything. Everything I did on my own choosing. And, you know, I brought a lot of crap into my life and my family's life and loved ones. I've got ex-wives and things like that. So it's like, I don't take all that stuff well, but there is a certain sense of not an accomplishment because I got to do it every day. I mean, I could walk out the door and go across the street and this could all go away. So it's something that you got to stay committed to, but it's really interesting as you just kind of sit back and start to reflect on it. And that's why I just kind of wanted to let this episode freeform a little bit, because I don't sit and think about this stuff. I wake up, I go to hot yoga like I did this morning. I come in and do the show. I do work on some of my other projects. I got a basketball game tonight, and I'll go lift and go to bed sober. But I don't think about, did you stay sober today? It's just I have built a life where this feels more natural to me and I feel more comfortable, and this is how I am happier, and I am a happier person because I choose to live this way. Now, I often get asked, would you do anything differently? Did you make any mistakes along the way? I probably would have been a little bit nicer to myself, a little more compassion early on. I was a little bit hard on myself early, and just because you had things going in a career and in a direction and trajectory, and then it's like you see your friends kind of keep going, and all of a sudden you're hitting the reset button at 35 years old and okay, this is gonna slow the career trajectory down a little bit. And it did, but it also pivoted it in a way that I didn't expect as well too, and I'm very grateful for that. But I probably could have been a little bit nicer to myself and get down because you feel like others are doing more, doing less. It's not more or less, what I had to do is different than what you had to do, but this is what helps make my life successful, what makes me happy, and how I can be the best version of myself, not only to my family, my loved ones, but now my daughter as well too. And that's a really important thing to me. I made some mistakes early on. Again, I don't look at the dating in early sobriety as a mistake. I would be careful with it, but you get a little cocky sometimes early on, you feel like you got this, right? You go out to Old Town Scottsdale and feel like you can go out, and you go do some of those things, and I'd always get back, and I'd be like, it wasn't even that fun. Everybody's getting hammered, and I'm like, okay. And even though I'm not going to drink, it's like, why put yourself in some of these situations? Is it necessary? Did you benefit out of it? And things like that. So these are just little things that I learned along the way. And I'm like, I'll go out for a little bit now, and I usually dip out early. Same thing with a wedding or something like that. We get invited to weddings, and I like to go to parties and events. And then it starts to get a little rowdy, and I dip out, the old Irish goodbye. And I'm like, all right, nobody even knows it. And early on in recovery, you think people are thinking what is he drinking? Is he not drinking? What is he having to drink? Nobody cares. You always get these thoughts early on, Christmas parties is oh, they're going to notice that I'm not drinking. Nobody cares. Nobody notices. Nobody cares. And the cool thing about in today's day and age is this kind of non-alcoholic movement, this kind of sober movement for people who aren't alcoholics and drug addicts is kind of a thing now. So you kind of have more cover than many of us ever did back in the day when it was just hey, we just don't drink anymore because we had a drinking problem. Now people are I just want to be healthier. I just want to, not wake up hungover. And I'm like, wow, good for you. I never felt that way, but that's pretty cool. So as I was doing some reflecting, I kept thinking about how have I changed? How have I changed? How am I a different person over the last 10 years? And it has been, it's not just, for those watching at home, it's not just a line that goes, sober and then goes straight up and life has gotten better. It goes up, it goes down, it goes backwards, it goes sideways. It does all of them in the same day. Your emotions are still a roller coaster. It's not again, you get sober and you get to just be a perfect person. It wasn't like that at all. But really, I think mentally over the course of the 10 years, again, being a dad, a stepdad, starting a business, going to graduate school, working in the behavioral health field, doing the startup thing, having it go well, having it not go well, hosting a podcast, the mental toughness that I think I've developed, not in some masculine tough guy sense of it, but just the ability to kind of continue on, the grit that it kind of takes to just accept life on life's terms. I think I've just developed that. And I don't mean to sound hardened or anything like that. That's not what I'm trying to refer to. There's just kind of a thing that I used to have to turn to something to cope in order to feel better, and now I can face it head on. And now I can accept whatever it is. Now I can just keep going. Bad things will happen. They're not going to pull me down. Good things will happen. I'm not going to get too high. I just kind of keep going. And there's just kind of a grit that I think I've developed over the last, couple years that has really helped me in how I've changed over time. But I would also say I've gotten a little softer. Sounds weird to say out loud into the microphone, but in a kind sense, right? I was always very judgmental. It kind of comes along with the alcoholic addiction kind of thing, judgmental, kind of sharp tongue, quick wit, all that kind of stuff. And it's almost like a shield that you build up over time, is kind of being able to fire darts at people pretty quickly. And I was funny and, intelligent, and you can kind of do those types of things. But I think over time, it's partially being a stepdad, being a dad, and just getting a little bit older, is that I've kind of softened some of these things. Maybe it's the hot yoga, that's kind of impacted some of my belief system as well, too. It's just a general softening, a kindness, a little more caring, a little more empathy over the years that has kind of come into my life. I think a large part of it is really being a dad, because you're responsible for this little 4-year-old girl, and just, the thoughts and the love and the compassion that kind of, you have to show that. It kind of bleeds over into the other areas of your life. And I don't think it's something that inherently. I've had dogs my whole life, and I love those dogs as well too. But then having a kid kind of ratchets it up to a new level. And so I just feel like, I've gained that over the course of the year, and I'm grateful that I have done that. But I'm also now grateful for all of the stuff that I've gone, the good, the bad, the rough, the hard, the sad, the frustrating, the angry, all of it. I'm grateful for how my life has taken me, and I'm super curious where the next 10 years is going to go. I really have no idea. I've got interest, I've got hobbies, I've got things that are happening that are really neat. But it's like I'm excited for what that looks like. I like being this version of myself much more than I liked the version 11 years ago. And I think that's probably the biggest way that I've changed. Obviously I've had physical things, when you here's a quick little side note. I talked to my first ex-wife last night. Her name's Sarah. Awesome girl. She's a high-flying exec for a company out of Colorado. She's crushing it. This is a person I'm really working on her to try and come in and do an interview here on the podcast. She is the one who left me and moved out of the house, had an intervention run on me, got one of the high-paying intervention, just like the show and stuff, that I walked into a house at my buddies, and, everybody's in the room kind of thing, and they got their letters, and there's tears and crying. I left and went to the Coach House, a bar right around the corner from that intervention, so it tells you how well that one went. But we had a really interesting call, because I called her and I said, hey, it's 10 years. How about that? That's not exactly what I said, but, we ended up talking for about an hour last night. And she said, that day, because she came and picked me up and took me to the detox facility. She wasn't living with me. She had moved out. We were getting ready to get divorced and all that kind of stuff. All the complete right thing that she did on her part. And that's why I want to have her on, to kind of share her thought and kind of the feelings and what she had to do in that point in time as someone who loved someone who was going through the addiction. And what she told me last night was like, I really had to separate that it had nothing to do with me and not take it personal. Like, this was all you. You were deep into your addiction, and it had nothing to do with me. And it was really interesting. But she's like, you didn't have any food. After you checked in, we went into your house and had to clean up everything, and we found all kinds of very odd things that I'd had, because I had people coming in, and she's like, you had no food in the house. You were kind of, withering away, because I was doing a lot of cocaine at the time. She's like, but you did have food, plenty of food and treats for the dogs. It was the only thing that you really had in the house. She said you had no other food in the house. So, kind of the physical health that I've kind of taken as a priority over the course of my journey now too. I went easy on myself. I was smoking cigarettes early when I got sober, and then kind of stopped doing. I used vaping to kind of quit, then got back into exercise. But then the diet wasn't right, and it was still getting a little soft and pudgy. And before I really committed to kind of the weightlifting, the hot yoga, the running, the basketball, and it's been transformative in terms of my mental health, the clarity, feeling good, looking good, all of that kind of stuff. It's really an important part of kind of my sobriety is now the exercise, the physical part of this. Like I said at the top of the show, you got to fill some time, right? You got to fill some time. I can't just be going over to the now closed Merc Bar or any of the bars over here in Old Town that I used to frequent. I've got time, and sitting around at my house is not a good use of that time. Nothing good happens when I'm just sitting alone, so I like to be out and be active. I would also say that, I've kind of reconnected with, call it your higher power, call it your religion, call it whatever you want, but I've kind of brought that back into my life. My daughter goes to a private Christian preschool, and so she, gets exposed, and gratefully, I love what they do over there and kind of the teachings there. And so that's kind of brought even more of that into my life, where it's like, I kind of forgot about the spiritual side of me, and I incorporate that in my yoga. In AA, we talk about a higher power. So it's just kind of put that more into focus, and I found great benefit in that as well, too, especially when things get a little rough. It's nice to kind of feel like I can pray or be present or do yoga or whatever it is to kind of connect me to something like that. So, this show it's been interesting. Like I'm already kind of recapping it in my mind. But I think one of the last points that I really want to hit here is, why I still don't drink. Because again, I could go drink today if I want to. I'm 45 years old. I have the option to do that. But for me, it's just not an option. I know what my life looks like when I choose to pick up. And, can't you just have a beer? Can't you have a glass of wine? Yeah, I can for a little bit. And then it changes. And then it goes to a little bit more and a little bit more. And the cool part is I know that. Like, I've tried that before. It doesn't work. So I don't need to try and convince myself that maybe you can do it differently this time. You go to the rooms in AA or any treatment center, you'll hear the people that thought that they could do it a little bit differently this time. Or maybe I'll just use some kratom, or maybe I'll go use one of these other little things to kind of try and just get a little high or buzz. Like, I know me. I know where it goes. If I want to, I can. I always have that permission to do so. But I'm very aware of that goes. And I just choose not to do that. I enjoy my life and what I've built, and I don't want to throw all those things away for a short-term little gain. I'm just not interested in that. It's really kind of protecting what I've built up until this point, and the friendships and the family and the trust and the relationships and all of those types of things. I don't want to let those go anymore. I just don't. And I just like myself better as a person in this version of myself, too. Does that mean it's not kind of an ongoing battle? It is, but it's not the battle it was in year one, right? It's not something I wake up every day and feel like I need to make sure that I tackle. I've built a life in a healthy way that allows me to kind of live it and not have to worry about that. When I'm going through divorce and things like that, or the business was starting to have issues, did things like that pop up into my mind? Sure, yeah, I'm a human. Things like that flow through, and you go, ooh, this spins up for a second. You go, really? You know how that's going to go, right? And I know how it's going to go. So I don't have to go prove it out to anyone else, because I'm quite confident I know exactly how that scenario is going to play out. And now being in recovery, it's a part of my identity as well, too. When I'm on Hinge or go out on dates, I have it very clear. It's like, hey, I don't drink. Don't care if you do. But I don't drink. It's just not for me. I had a problem with alcohol. The last drink was 10 years ago. I don't open every date with a conversation like that, but it does certainly come up. And to some people, it can be kind of a deal breaker if they don't want to. Completely respect that. But it's just part of who I am. And honestly, I'm able to give back to a lot of people because of the experience that I've had over the last decade in dealing with this. So, it's been an interesting journey. As the Grateful Dead said, it's a long, strange trip, right? And I'm not sure there's any better way to kind of say that. But when you look back on the 10 years, I'm not sure I would do much differently, in all honesty. There's some highs, there's some lows. I've learned from every single thing along the way. It's not easy. If you hear this episode and you have somebody else who may be struggling, maybe they're thinking about getting sober, maybe they're early in recovery, share this episode with them. Maybe, even send them my profile. They can send me a message, a DM, an email. I'm happy to talk to people. I do it all the time. It's really what kind of spurred this podcast, was really kind of talking about my addiction, behavioral health, and all those types of things. I'm an open book about all of this stuff, and I thought I'd just take a little half hour today and kind of walk you through what the journey could look like. You know, it wasn't necessarily the most organized thing, but that's kind of how recovery can be. You just got to wake up. You do the one day at a time thing and try and make the best decisions you can as you go through life. And good things will happen. Good things will happen, and I think I'm pretty good proof that can be the case. So anyways, like I said, a little different format we took today. My 10 years was September 11th, 2014. So that was September 11th, 2024 was yesterday when you hear this episode. I'm going to go pick up my chip, and I'll bring it in and put it on camera next time. So hope you enjoyed that. Hope you got a little something out of it. Share this episode with a friend, maybe somebody who's in recovery or thinking about recovery. And again, if you got any questions or comments, reach out to me. I'm happy to help. My name is Steve Moak. I am the Unlicensed Counselor. Until next time, thank you very much.